Hi, John. How are you keeping?
I'm very well, dog. Yourself?
Yeah, I think so. It's coming to the end of the week. The weather's fine. I'm looking forward to the weekends and looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, and on that, I'm host today on our mini pod of Talking Toughness, and I'm delighted to be joined by today's special guest, Doug Strycharczyk of AQR International. um, so we're just going to rattle through just a few questions, just to get a little bit of insight to your inner workings and motives, I suppose, Doug. So I'll uh, I'll dive right in. And I thought, geez, what could I ask Doug? Um, and I thought, well, do you know what? You've been doing this a long time now. I thought I'll try and be nice, and not dig at your age too much. But for for those who don't know you, it's fair to say you're at an age where you could easily have just sat back and retired by now and just be tending to an allotment or watching TV. Uh, so, what is it about working with mental toughness that gives you the the energy and the desire, not just to kind of keep going, but to actually keep pushing yourself, keep innovating, keep spreading the word even further?
Right. Well, that's a good question. I probably ask myself the same question quite a lot. Um, well, it's not giving too much of my age away, but people will be able to get a calculator out and work it out roughly. I started working in 1969. That's my first job, working for a very large company called United Drapery Stores. And if I look back and think about what I was being taught and how organizations were being run and how people live their lives, we have a hugely different environment now. I would say a much better environment now than we did then, but it's still not there. There's still a much better way of living your life. There's still a much better way of producing wealth, and I'll come back to that in a second, and a much better way of generating well-being. When I started work, I was sent on a course at what is now Northumbria University on leadership. It wasn't about leadership at all. It was about management, and it was about a guy called F.W. Taylor, and it's part of the
Oh,
history of it all, and it's about scientific management. I remember that, and basically, that said, if you tell people clearly enough what you expect from them, they will respond positively, or you give them a clip around the ear. And uh, the big word then was obedience. I haven't heard the word
mm,
obedience for about 20 years. And, and that was very much the philosophy. And that's where things like job descriptions came from. I came across an organization this week that's we're talking about its job descriptions. And that is such a waste of time as an idea to set out a list of tasks for people. You know, I think we should be getting to setting out the purpose of a role and like giving people freedom to do what's needed to achieve the purpose of their role. But we still insist on giving lists of tasks, which is
mm,
absolutely crazy. It's a relic of the past. And things like performance management systems, from the first time I came across them, I couldn't understand how they work because I saw people terrified of participating in them, and I saw managers terrified of doing them. So, here was a system that everybody seems to be using and nobody believed it. And so there was a load of practices around in those days that caused me to question things. And over the years, I kind of began to see, I think you know about one of the case studies that I sometimes talk about. I worked with a guy in Coalport, China, who had a completely different philosophy. And he had 1,000 employees, and he would deliberately walk into his operation and at least be seen or speak to every one of those employees, say every 7 or 10 days.
mm.
Managers then didn't. They sat in the office and they barked out orders and wrote letters that were pinned up on notice boards. He
This
was
is the
just doing something
legendary
completely
lead,
different.
isn't it?
Yeah, and that fascinated me. It fascinated me how this guy could do something very different from the conventional wisdom that was getting a completely different response. And he did get a different response. I mean, things like equivalent organizations in his industry had scrap rates of about 30%. His was less than 5%. His absenteeism levels were negligible compared to, like the average was 6 or 7% across most industries. So he was
mm,
achieving things. And I thought, well, there is a different way of doing things, but we seem to be focused on behavior. And bit by bit, I began to question within myself what is missing. And it was when I met with Peter Clough, and he started talking about this concept of mental toughness. That initially I didn't quite buy into it because even in those days, and I think this is something we perhaps would talk about, the idea of mental toughness is strongly associated with winning and losing. And
mm.
so it didn't really appeal to me straight away because I didn't like the idea that you'd introduce something where people could actually deliberately lose. And but as we began to kind of explore the idea, and we started to take it out into the world of education, into the world of business, and take it away from sport. And I think it's legitimate to think about it in terms of winning and losing in sport. But that's not
Mm.
what you want in all these other spheres. And as we began to see the concept beginning to work, the four C's, the four core elements, began to become a little bit clearer as we began to get uh, responses from practitioners who are asking really good questions about, why does this not explain something when I think it should? I think we've got ourselves into a point now, John, where we've got a really good understanding of the mental toughness concept. But along the way, it's like my colleague once said to me, you can no longer complete that questionnaire that we've developed because I know what the answers look like to every single
Hmm.
question. But there is an aspect of it that is also useful. I can think about myself and see myself through the lens of that framework. And what I've learned about me is I love challenge. I
Mm.
love finding something that's difficult to do or awkward to do, or even when I'm told it can't be done. I love trying to find a way of getting it done. Now that sends me down blind alleys sometimes, but with mental toughness, it hasn't. I've been able
Mm.
to kind of take what I do with the concept to a level, ground it very often with your support, well, mostly with your support and Peter's support, and then take it on to another level. And to me, that's exciting. It's a bit like, why should I retire? Why should I stop? Well, people say, Doug, you're way past 65. Well, that's just a number. Why should a number determine my life? I think what I'm doing and my capability to do it should determine whether I stop working or not. And I just feel now I'm on I'm onto something and I've got the capability to keep going. So I will keep going.
I was also thinking, one of the things that's kind of fascinating about what you do is actually the variety of people that you mix with. Okay, so be, because you're talking to business leaders, national or international organizations, you're talking to individual coaches, you're talking to academics, and how well do you think those different people's requirements and knowledge of something like mental toughness actually align? And are the ways that we could bring those different kinds of people together to cooperate better?
Right, that's again a great question. Again, I think for me it comes back to the concept because for me the mental toughness concept, so it's very loosely, is it describes our mental responses to everything we come across, and therefore that is true for everybody, whatever they do. We often hear people explain things in terms of the fight or flight syndrome, but nobody goes beyond that. So my question, which usually stops people in their tracks, is: okay, you've got two people of equal abilities. why does one flee and one does one fight? It's not, we're talking about two different behaviors, and those people could behave in either way equally. What is it that makes them different? And that is something that I think has to come into our thinking in the way we deal with situations, with people, with organizations, and so on. We try to adopt one size fits all approaches to everything we do. And we have here a lens through which we can understand our own responses, but perhaps we can understand the responses of others. But if we look at the mental toughness concept, the mistake that I would say that we made in the early days of taking it out to the market is we started talking about mental toughness. And that's not people were interested in. They were interested in their problem and a solution.
Yeah.
And what we had to do is we had to turn it round and say, do you realize your problem is a function of your mental approach to events? And that is where I think we're getting the breakthrough, because what we're beginning to understand very broadly is some people are concerned about performance or attainment in the world of education. Some people are concerned about well-being. Some people are concerned about agility, the ability to respond to, this VUCA world that we imagine we live in now. Some people are concerned about aspirations, believing that they can achieve something better in a few years. So what we need to do is to turn it round and say, we're beginning to understand your problems, whether you're an educator or a businessman or a coach, and we can show you how this is part of the solution, probably a very big part of the solution. So that's the thing that I've learned from all the connections I've made with people. And that's beginning to help. It's also helping in another way, John, because what we're also then sort of often doing is dig into a deeper level, because somebody's talking about well-being, they're actually talking about psychological safety or trust. Well, we can take the conversation down to that level and still use mental toughness as a lens through which to examine that particular issue.
Yeah, it's actually it's a really good insight, because certainly from an academic point of view, you tend to think of the concept and then the outcomes are measured variables. But I wonder actually if I think that's also really valuable for coaches to keep in mind at all times, because you can go off and get trained in X, Y, or Z, but remembering that you're not selling X, Y, or Z. You're using those to be able to address what people actually want. I think it's a great sort of thing to kind of keep in the front of your mind. I'll ask you one more question, Doug, for the sake of brevity. And this is sort of looking forward to the future. What's your biggest hope for what we can do with mental toughness going forward?
Well, a very short and perhaps glib answer to that is, a few years ago, Coca-Cola had a mission statement, and that was to put a bottle of Coke within an arm's reach of every person on the planet. Well, I really believe that creating self-awareness about your mental toughness would genuinely help everybody. And so it's never going to be achieved in my lifetime, but to bring that concept within the arm's reach of every person on the planet, make it accessible to them, I think would be my ultimate goal, because it just makes a difference for everyone. And how we do that is another challenge. It means the way we already work is we have to access all these different opportunities in different markets in different ways. And there are lots and lots of obstacles. But the biggest obstacle is pop psychology. There's a lot of fads out there that are fascinating, and we have to learn from how they are presented and how they are sold to people, because lots of practitioners like them. They will often spend a lot of money on acquiring them, and that baffles me too. And it creates its own problem as well, because if they spend money on it, and we get a lot of that with one particular concept, people are reluctant to say they spent that money stupidly. They shouldn't have spent that money. There are much better ideas to spend their money on, and it kind of ties them into the concept. So we've got some unthinking to do. We've got to get people to kind of open their minds and understand what it is we've got. But that's our challenge. We can't make people think. We've got to be able to present what we do in a way that's accessible to them. So there's
Mm.
lots of challenges in that ultimate goal. But I think, again, it's a cliche, we can make a difference for a lot of people.
What a fantastic aspiration, and I think a great inspiring response for us to wrap up our mini podcast. So, uh, Doug, thank you very much for being the guest today, and we'll talk again soon.